begin, thank you so much for coming today. This is the last one in what's been, I think, a really good series of talks on Ignatian Spirituality. For those of you who weren't here last week, I mentioned at the beginning that I know that a lot of you might be looking for something, some way or ways in which to grow spiritually. And if that is a very common thing that I experience in my work. If any of you feel that there is something you'd like to access and you don't know how to do it or where to do it, please let me know, because if there is sufficient interest, we will try and have a meeting in order to investigate what it might be. It could be a retreat in daily life, for example, but I'd like to know, what do you feel, what do you want? This is a suggestion coming from Father Gerald Hughes, so it's not just me. And for those of you interested in coming next term, we're into Franciscan Spirituality next term, and the first one is on the 25th of April, the last Thursday in April. But for now, much more importantly, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kate Stogdon. She's a Cenacle Sister living in community in South London. She's been a tutor at the London Centre for Spirituality since 2004, and she was one of my favourite tutors when I was in the second year of that course because of her clarity and her knowledge and experience. She particularly enjoys exploring in depth the vision contained in the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, which we've heard a lot about now. She also teaches theology at Education for Parish Service, working in partnership with Mary's University College in Twickenham. As part of the Religious Life Institute based at Heathrow Throp College, she also teaches on the Theology of Religious Life, the Master's degree module. However, it is her Ignatian roots that inform all that she does, and we'll see that for ourselves. So, with no more delay, welcome, Kate.
So, good afternoon, everybody. I hope that you can hear me, okay? And thank you very much for coming along to this last in the series. I'm very aware of being the last speaker in the series, and I know that each of the people before me will have had different approaches, a particular lens, a vantage point on the exercises, and I'm hoping that I will integrate some of the themes that you've been looking at over the last weeks. Because what I want to look at today is how the dynamic or the process of the exercises is lived out within our everyday realities of life through the practice of spiritual discernment. I don't know how much people have talked to you about spiritual discernment, but because I know that Jerry Hughes took you through an extended examen, I know that you've practiced it, so I can presume your knowledge. One of my passions that I have is to reflect on the spiritual exercises from the inside out. I like to think of, if you really want to understand the exercises, you have to learn how to live them and really understand them from the inside out. In other words, I think it's very important to take what you can look at as an objective process, you know, the shape of the spiritual exercises. So I hope you'll be familiar now with the principle and foundation, week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, and the contemplatio. That's like the objective shape of the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, which inform Ignatian spirituality. But to take that objective process and to live it from the inside out is to actually notice how subjective the exercises are. When I say subjective, what I mean is that each one of us has to make them our own. So our particular road through the exercises, our own path of Christian discipleship, has to be our path, my path, your path. And it's going to look particular according to you, your personality and your life. So you could say, I think, that Ignatian spirituality is bespoke at its best. It's very posh. I love that word, bespoke. My brother is a sculptor, does bespoke pieces, and it's what you want and what you need. So does this mean that Ignatian spirituality is really like a pick and mix? You take what you like and you ignore the rest? No, it isn't. And the reason that it isn't is because you always have the rules for discernment, which I'm going to look at today, and the presence of a guide. So there's you and your relationship with God, and there's a guide who helps you to reflect on what's going on. So once you immerse yourself in the dynamic of the exercises, you begin a process of conversion. So I'm sure that if you've been here for the last few weeks, you'll have been engaged in some way in a process of transformation. You may or may not be aware of that, but I really believe that, because that's at the heart of the exercises, is a transformation. So I just want to remind us to begin with the shape of Ignatian spirituality that will inform what happens to us during that transformation. Where we begin with in the exercises is a vision. Without a vision, the people perish. And the vision at the heart of the exercises is contained in the principle and foundation, in that description of Ignatius about what he thinks the purpose of life is. And it's not an easy exercise. I've actually given us in the handout a couple of renditions of the principle and foundation. But at its heart, I think it's about Ignatius's belief that each one of us is created in the image and likeness of God and called to live in love in the presence of God, and to live into the fullness of what it means to be a child of God, a son, daughter of God, in the midst of creation. In other words, all of life is gift, and we're invited to be so free in ourselves that we can allow ourselves to really receive that gift. But of course, this beautiful vision of what it means to be human, we are human, and so we're frail and broken and damaged to some extent, and we can't always live out of that vision and that beautiful image of God. And so we have to, in the exercises, become conscious of the impact of sin on us, on our world, and on our capacity to live God's vision. And it's only when we recognise that God loves us, even however damaged or broken that we are, that I believe we can hear the call that Ignatius extends to us through the exercises. He invites us to turn towards God and to hear the call of Jesus. And that when we respond to that call, we're taken into this journey of intimacy, a journey of deepening discipleship. And because we're Christians, this is the story of the Christian call, it takes us into the way of the passion and then into the heart of the resurrection, to recognise that in the resurrected Christ I can live this vision. Now I've just taken you on this really whistle-stop tour, I hope you recognised it, through the dynamic of the exercises. What I want to look at today is what are some of the ways in which we can concretely live this vision. So we might say, that's a lovely vision, it's beautiful, I love it. Or we might say, oh, that's so idealistic, I can't possibly live that, you're in cloud cuckoo land. But if I want to live in love in the presence of God, how do I do that concretely in the midst of my everyday life? So I would like to invite us first of all to consider again the principle and foundation, but with a particular lens. And it's through two images that I want to remind us of that I know will be familiar to all of you. The first is a lovely, very evocative image that's found in Proverbs chapter 8, 30 to 31. And it's the description of wisdom. I was beside the master craftsman, delighting him day after day, ever at play in his presence, at play everywhere on his earth, delighting to be with the children of humanity. So there's that lovely image of God the Creator at work and wisdom as a child at play. I think it's such a beautiful image of how we're supposed to be, children of God, to live in love in God's presence, and that freedom of a young child at play is something of the invitation to us of how to live. So that's one image I want you to keep in your mind of this. I was sitting on the train actually with a child behind me, and I thought, oh, how lovely, a child, that I want to think about a child and play. And this child was kicking the back of my seat. So I was thinking, it's the whole mixture of what it means to be a child, doesn't it? But just remember that freedom that there is in being a child of God, that we're called to live that freedom. So that's one image. The second image is one that is also beautiful, but is less comfortable. And it's the image from Jeremiah about going to the potter's house. Again, I know it's very familiar. Of Jeremiah going to the potter's house and finding the potter working at the wheel. But the vessel he was making came out wrong. So he began again and shaped it into another vessel as he thought fit. Yes, like clay is in the potter's hand, so are you in mine. Now I think it's a beautiful image, the potter and being the clay, but it's very uncomfortable. If you've ever been on a retreat and someone has told you to go and pray with being moulded, being formed by God, it's uncomfortable. But I want us to also hold that image of what it means to be the clay in the hand of the potter, and that image of the child at play. And you might even want to put those images together. That happened for me this year on my retreat, of the invitation to be in the potter's house as a child, at play while the potter is working. So they're the images I'm inviting us into. And I'd like us to just hear the principle and foundation from that place. A place of play and a place of being formed by God. So on your handout you have on the first page Fleming's rendition of the principle and foundation. So you might want to read it, you might just want to listen to what God is inviting us to hear through this today. The goal of our life is to live with God forever. God, who loves us, gave us life. Our own response of love allows God's life to flow into us without limit. And all things in this world are gifts of God, presented to us so that we can know God more easily and make a return of love more readily. As a result, we appreciate and use all these gifts of God insofar as they help us develop as loving persons. But if any of these gifts become the centre of our lives, they displace God and so hinder our growth towards our goal. In everyday life then, we must hold ourselves in balance before all of these created gifts, insofar as we have a choice and are not bound by some obligation. We should not fix our desires on health or sickness, wealth or poverty, success or failure, a long life or a short one. For everything has the potential of calling forth in us a deeper response to our life in God. Our one desire, our only desire, and our one choice should be this. I want and I choose what better leads to the deepening of God's life in me. Now, I know that was quite a long passage, but at the heart of it, we have here described to us this amazing creative energy that is God. That when I said about remembering the spirit of wisdom at work throughout creation. So the creative energy of God working everything in creation to the purposes of God and inviting human beings, inviting me, inviting you to inhabit our place within creation, to live into our vocation. And we also have in the Principle and Foundation the human response described by Ignatius that enables a playful, free disposition that's so beautifully described in Proverbs as being ever at play in the presence of the master craftsman, delighting to be in the midst of creation. So if God is doing what God sees as bringing creation to its fullness, I don't have to work so hard. I don't know about you, I work far too hard at life. And the invitation to be free is actually about letting go of the striving, allowing God to be God and allowing me to be me. And so it really is about being at balance to allow, if God picks up, presents one thing to me, I can take it and I can put it down. It's a wonderful image of freedom that I often can't live. I'm sure I'm not alone in this, and yet I believe in that vision. I'm not going to read the second hand, the next page of the handout, but I've given you quite a lot of content, and I'm hoping that you'll take it home and pray with it and be with it. The second thing I've given you is actually a paraphrase of the foundation, and all I want to do is to call your attention to one line, which I think is essential for what we're doing today. It's, I am from love, of love, for love. So that's the fourth line of this paraphrase. That I am from love, of love, and for love. That it's so simple. It's all about love. And it's only from love that I can be free. It's only because of love, in love, and for love that I can live the vision that's at the heart of this. So the Principle and Foundation is like a temperature gauge. It's quite cold in this church, isn't it? So I dress completely inappropriately for today. And the temperature gauge, you say, oh, how am I? How am I in this place? I'm feeling a bit cold, but actually inside of myself I have a certain energy that's giving me a warmth. So the temperature gauge for the Principle and Foundation, you can notice, what am I inspired by in this? What do I want to live up to, if you like? And what do I feel uncomfortable about? What do I think, oh, that's a bit of a stretch? Because that's really important. So, what I believe about the exercises is that we take the vision that comes out of an experience of relationship with God. Let's never forget that the exercises come out of Ignatius' experience of being changed by God over time. And then he wrote it all down. Okay? But it's actually out of an experience, the vision. And so I can take that vision and I can use it as my temperature gauge to say, how am I today with this vision? Where am I? How am I? And my freedoms and my lack of freedom, my attraction and my repulsion might be a wrong, resistance, whatever is making me want to pull away, will tell me something about where God is at work in me. So that's the first thing I want to say. The first basic thing is, where am I in the vision that's given to us by Ignatius? The second thing I want to say is that at the heart of the exercises, at the heart of Christianity, is that notion of call. That when we're invited into the process of Ignatian spirituality, God is calling us to live into our vocation. So every day we can ask ourselves, how is God calling me in my life? There's a wonderful line in the middle of the exercises, in one of the exercises of the kingdom, where we pray for the grace not to be deaf to his call. I don't know whether anyone else has told you about that, or whether you've come across it before. It's not just listening to a call. You know, hearing someone call you is one thing. Praying for the grace not to be deaf to his call is wonderful, because it just encapsulates how sometimes we hear something straightforwardly, we might not like it, but we can hear it. Other times, there's something insistently trying to communicate itself to us. You know, the Holy Spirit might be trying to get through, the potter might be trying to form and pull us into another shape, and we don't really want to hear it. We're being deaf to it. So praying for the freedom not to be deaf is very important. So what am I hearing in my life? Every day I can ask myself this question. What am I hearing loud and clear? What am I hearing whispered very quietly, so that actually I can choose not to hear it? That's also very important. It could be something very small and quiet, but actually very, very significant. So that's the second thing I'm saying to you. The first, where am I with this vision? The second is, how is God calling me? And the third is, what do I desire? Again, at the heart of Ignatian spirituality, Ignatius invites us again and again to ask God our Lord for what I desire. Now, desire sometimes gets a bad press, doesn't it? It can't be good for you to want things. But desire, Ignatian desiring, is a bit different from how we generally think of desire. I ask God our Lord for what I want, what I truly want. And when we consider our life and everything that's going on inside of us, there's probably a whole lot of different wants and desires and needs and urges, and it's all there. We're wanting to listen to our deepest desire. And Ignatius believes that our deepest desire is to live in love in the presence of God. Okay? So if we're starting from that vision of the principle and foundation, we're asking God to lead us and to guide us to that desire to live in love. So the desire at the heart of the second week of the exercises is to ask for an intimate knowledge of our Lord, who has become a human being for me, so that I can love him and follow him and be like him. It's like I ask for the desire for a growing intimacy with Christ that will change me. So I can ask myself, what each day? What am I desiring? What is the way that I live my life telling me about my desires? I can ask for a knowledge of the true love. Now, what Ignatius means by this, he says, well, here is Jesus, and he is perfectly God and perfectly man, isn't he? So he's like the greatest vision of what it means to be human. So we can ask, what does it really mean to be that human, with that sense of the divine at work? Remember? The wisdom at work within creation, inviting us to live into the best and the whole of ourselves. So what is it that allows me to live that? So I ask for the knowledge to know how to live as Christ. But equally, I ask for a knowledge of how I'm knocked off course. Now, how he puts it is a knowledge of the true life and a knowledge of the deceits of whatever it is that gets into us and takes us off course to not live this life that we're being called to. So we have the vision, we have the call, we have the desires, that we're asking for a desire. And this is what helps us to, day by day, discern where we're being led in life. And the wonderful thing about Ignatian spirituality, I think, is that it's so practical. It's very, very practical. It gives you lots of tools. And I haven't got time, I won't be here all day to tell you about all these tools, and I think you've probably heard about some of them as well over the course of the last weeks. But I'm just going to flag up for you to look further at and think about some of the basic tools. So the first thing I want to say, as a practical tool, daily tool of discernment, Ignatius gives us what he calls the additions. Okay? All that means is it's a collection of helps. And it's things like, he says, if you really want to know how God is calling you and attend to your desires and really follow them, it really helps if you set aside some time where you actually can reflect, Carve out 10 minutes in the day or half an hour, or when you're walking the dog or sitting on the bus, carve out a time that you can reflect. Light a candle. Get a picture that you can focus on. Pay attention to your environment. Keep a journal. Find a friend to talk to. I'm just throwing these out because these are some of the tools that he says help you to discern. So the additions or the helps to help you are really important. The second thing that's absolutely crucial, that I don't need to look at because you've already done it with Jerry Hughes, but I just want to flag it up, is the examen. So basic, so important, and gives you a crucial way of noticing what's going on in your inner life. The examen of consciousness enables you to see what's of God, what brought me to life in this day, and where am I being taken off somewhere else? And you do that through the examen. But what I'm really going to focus on, I've got to the heart of where I wanted to get to. All of that was all my scaffolding to get me to here. So if you've fallen asleep, please wake up again, because this is the point of today. The third tool is the rules for the discernment of spirits. And I don't know what people have told you about discernment of spirits, if anything, over the course of these weeks. But I believe that at the heart of being able to practically discern where God is calling you is the discernment of spirits. Now, discernment is a word that's thrown around, bandied around a lot within Ignatian spirituality. And it really means discrimination, okay? Sorting out things. So it's the idea that within ourselves and within our world, we have lots of things going on. So internally, we have, if you look inside of yourself, you'll find thoughts and feelings and desires and what your parents told you and what your teachers think and what the politicians think. All these things inside. And how do you know what to listen to? How do you know what's true in the best sense of the word, what is of God, and what isn't? And isn't it all just mixed up together? And how do you sort it out? And in fact, you spend a lifetime sorting it out. But the rules for discernment of spirits are centred on two concepts. One is called spiritual consolation and one is called spiritual desolation. And if you turn to page 3 of your handout, I have given you a little definition for us to reflect on this. Because I believe that spiritual consolation and desolation, and in fact it's not just that I believe, it's true, that within Ignatian spirituality, to understand and to practice discernment, you need to have a felt, inside knowledge of what spiritual consolation and spiritual desolation feel like. And I'm saying that really clearly, feel like. You do not get to this through your head. If you try to get to it through your head, you just get tripped up and you end up thinking, oh, maybe it's about I'm feeling really happy, so therefore I must be feeling consoled. Do you know how you tend to think of the word consoled as meaning happy? But that is not spiritual consolation. And desolation you think means I'm feeling really depressed today, or sad, or listless. That's not spiritual desolation. So if we actually look at the handout, consolation and desolation as described by Ignatius. Now let's remember that he wrote in the 16th century and that the language is not always that helpful, and we do have to work with the language a little. He has a worldview of good and evil spirits. Now I'm not going to get into a theological debate about the language, even though that might be interesting for another time. But I think it's still true to say that in our world today, we can all say there are forces of good and evil. We know there are because look at the state of the world. And that these play out. They play out inside of ourselves, inside the church, inside society, and the world at large. And that the good spirit is that which is of God, that is trying to invite us to live this vision of living in love in the presence of God. And that the evil spirit, however you want to, and I know you did sin with Gemma, however you want to think about evil, is that which wants to knock you off and disrupt and dismantle. So it wants to undermine your relationship with God. So it's characteristic of the good spirit of God, of the spirit that is of God, in the person who's trying to live a life that's moving in the direction of God, to give courage and strength, tears, inspirations and quiet, making things easy and removing all obstacles so that the person can move forward in doing good. So that which is of God doesn't necessarily make you happy. I mean, you might not be feeling externally happy, you might be feeling sad, but actually there's a felt sense of peace that in your relationship with God, there's a unity, you're where you're supposed to be. There's a sense of being at home in how home is supposed to be. Not necessarily what your home has been, but what is meant by home. And that the evil spirit harasses, saddens, obstructs, disturbs with reasoning. So I said you won't get to it through your head. And often the evil spirit will get in there and start to analyse and say, oh, I don't know whether she's saying this right or right. Oh, well, it's all right to say that, but have you thought of this, and what about that? It's that part of you, I think of it as a little sometimes quiet voice that just pours negative things into my ear. So however I'm wanting to live, I have this little voice that says, oh, they're not liking what you're saying, It's like they've all switched off, they're reading the handouts instead. And you don't know what you're doing anyway. Or negative, so that your peace you become dispersed. So how do you know spiritual consolation? How you know what in your life is deepening your relationship with God? So Ignatius says there are some markers of spiritual consolation. I use the word consolation when any interior movement is produced in the soul, which leads her to become inflamed with the love of her Creator and Lord. When a person sheds tears which lead to the love of our Lord, every increase of faith, hope and charity, interior happiness, leaving the soul quiet and at peace in her Creator and Lord. So again, it's not necessarily that I'm feeling happy, but I might be feeling happy, but I'm at one in my relationship with God. I might be crying tears because I realise I've been living my life the wrong way. Or I feel so moved because I realise how loved I am by somebody. It doesn't, it's the marker of it is that actually I draw nearer to God. That's how I know what spiritual consolation is. And the markers of spiritual desolation is a darkness and disturbance in the soul, attraction to what is low, a lack of confidence in which one feels oneself to be without hope and without love, lazy, lukewarm, sad, and as though cut off from one's Creator and Lord. So So again, you could be in spiritual desolation and feeling really quite happy. Feeling like, oh, all's well with the world, I'm doing rather well in my job, and people think I'm quite good, and loads of people come and listen to me, and I got a really good mark in my last exam, and I think I might be going places, and, become quite a celebrity and quite important. Can you hear how, in fact, there's a lack of peace, there's a lack of centeredness, there's a bit too much ego, or there could be insecurity, whatever's going on. It doesn't matter so much what it is, how you catch it and recognise it is the effect that you draw away from your relationship with God. You might not need God so much because you're all right on your own, thanks very much. I don't need God to remake me into another vessel because I actually quite like the vessel I am. So these markers of spiritual consolation and desolation are quite tricky, and I think it takes a lifetime to practice recognising. But that is how we discern where God is calling us in our life. And I'm just going to come to the end now of what I want to do. One of the things I've been doing over the last couple of years is to think a little bit about this idea of approaching the spiritual exercises from the inside out, and of saying, well, actually, for me, this is what the call feels like. For me, this is what spiritual consolation feels like, or lives itself out, or manifests itself in my life. For me, this is what desolation feels like. And so I've been doing some writing that is me trying to reflect on that. And I offer you some of this in order for you to hopefully go away and do your own reflections on how is this for you in your life? Because it's going to be different. Because I'm me. Everybody, how the spirits work with you reflects your particular age, sex, history, story, personality. Different times in your life it's going to take a different form. But there will be something of the shape of the characteristics that Ignatius describes. Sometime last year I prayed with the Gospels in the morning and I was reading the readings of the day, and there was a little excerpt from the prophet Jeremiah which I read, and it really got into me and spoke to me, and I thought, wow, this is just like consolation and desolation. So I wrote this little piece here that I've called Discerning the Difference about consolation and desolation. And I took the passage from Jeremiah and I thought, now I recognise this in me, and I recognise this as part of what it means to be human. And it's that part of me that is really at play in the presence of God, is that child that wants to live this vision and is really happy and free and, loves being with the master craftsman and wants to be changed and formed and all the rest of it, okay? So I took the words of Jeremiah and I made them my own. I am one whose heart, sorry, wrong way round. So just to show I'm human. But I started from the gift. In fact, I started with the desolation of that part of myself that doesn't want to live like that, is actually pulling away. Because Jeremiah, first of all, speaks about what it's like to be turned away from our truest source. So that's about sin, isn't it? That part of us that's divided and doesn't want to live, would much rather be headstrong and live their own way. So I am one whose heart turns from the Lord. I am like dry scrub in the wastelands. If good comes, I have no eyes for it. I settle in the parched places of the wilderness, a salt land uninhabited. And let's contrast that to the one who's turned towards the Lord. I am one who puts my trust in the Lord. With the Lord for my hope, I am like a tree by the waterside that thrusts its roots to the stream. When the heat comes, it feels no alarm. Its foliage stays green. It has no worries in a year of drought and never ceases to bear fruit. So it's a very strong image, isn't it, that we have here. And Jeremiah is wonderful for these images that he has. And I think that somehow it captures for us the heart of spiritual consolation and desolation. That in spiritual consolation, I might be in a year of drought. My life might be being pulled apart and I might have all sorts of things going on. But fundamentally, I can trust the Lord. I know that whatever happens, all is well, say Julian of Norwich, all fundamentally is well. And that when I am besieged by spiritual desolation, my heart is turned from the Lord. Now, it might not appear to be to other people, but if I go within myself, I know that fundamentally I'm just turned away from what is my best and truest self. And when you're being attacked or informed or taken over by spiritual desolation, what I like about this more than anything else is if good comes, I have no eyes for it. So I can be living in an amazing place with a lot of gifts in my life. I could be being led along somewhere that's really very important, but I have no eyes for the gift. So again, how does that play itself out within my life? And I'm not going to read this to you, I'm going to let you read it on your own, but what I've done is to say, this is the times in my life when I know that I am focused and being led by the Lord. And these are the times when I know that actually, at the end of this, I wrote, I am greedy and gorge on negativity. It's very hard to write that, and it's very hard to then say it to all of you, but it came out of a really authentic place. I'm greedy and gorge on negativity. I swim towards the deep end without a life raft, and I expect the tide will die. Now that is the part of ourselves that turns away from God and expects that, it's all absurd, this life, and it's all going to end badly, and it's like a refusal to really believe in the God of love. And contrast that to this wonderful image of deep peace in God. Okay? So those two dynamics are at work in our life. And all I want to do to finish is to take us back to the principal foundation and to that reading, that rendition by Bergen and Schwann, where it says, Lord my God, when your love spilled over into creation, you thought of me. I am from love, of love, for love. So Ignatian Spirituality gives us a vision, a call, a path of Christian discipleship that is informed by love. And that when we, on a daily basis, take a little bit of time to reflect on what's really going on inside of ourselves, we find that inside of ourselves, inside of me, inside of you, inside of every person, I believe, there is this little tussle between the forces for good of God that is doing everything it can to bring us to be who we're truly called to be. And then this other part that just doesn't want it to happen. And I really believe that we have to stand strong, particularly in Lent. It's a time to say, stand up to that part of yourself that doesn't want you to live up to your vocation. Because we all have the strength within us to live the fullness of our vocation, which is to live in love in the presence of God. I shall finish there.
I agreed with people to wait till I get the microphone.
I know it's about personal spiritual growth, but it sounds to me extremely lonely.
Oh,
feels good. I've done exercises on it, but it also feels a very personal and isolated thing. I can't feel I'm going hand in hand with all the people I love somehow. It's very much like personal, solitary development. Say a word about that.
Yes, thank you. I think that's really important to bring out, because it can be one of the criticisms of Ignatian spirituality that reflects when it came to birth as the 16th century and was the growth of individualism. And in today's society as well, there is a great attention to the individual, which is why it can be so popular. But in fact, it is an attention to the personal and the individual, but in relation to everybody else. So in fact, the vision that I was talking about is for the whole of creation. And that when you are taken through the dynamic of the exercises, it is in relation to the other people in your life, in relation to the gospel and being used as to serve, to go out, I don't think it's just how I've presented it. I think that it can be a criticism, but that would be a distortion, really, to say that it's just about the individual, because the vision is for the whole of creation. So it's the individual within creation. Is that okay?
I was contemplating the terminology you were using.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I was contemplating the terminology you were using, construction and consolation and desolation. And I was thinking perhaps there was deeper meaning to the word consolation being the construction of the soul, construction of the soul, and desolation being perhaps the destruction or the disparaging things for the soul. Just as a play on that.
Yeah.
And extending the idea.
Thank you. I think that's interesting. Particularly, you've put together about that idea of the potter and being formed, and that what is of God is going to make you and unmake you and remake you, and that what is not of God dismantles, but in a way that doesn't build up the life of God, or doesn't build up the life of the community. So thank you. I think it's helpful.
Isolated kind of method of self-enhancement. I think, for me, in my experience, has been the connection between the practice and the love of God, such that actually you are beyond yourself transformed. If it was just about self-help, it seems to me that once you stop it, that's the end. But what contemplation does is to actually mean that you start changing despite yourself. So you get to a point where you say, how on earth have I got to? And you've got to actually start thinking in new categories, new filters.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for making that point, because I think you've really put your finger on something there. That's, you could say, oh, it's really like a self-help book and just making you better, but it's so not about that, because it is about self-transformation. And so you might have a particular agenda for what you think you might want, but it's about what God is doing in you, and that will change you and will change other people. Yes. Thank you.
Would you be able to share maybe from your personal experiences how this consolation or personal transformation led you into service or into, as it says here, moving towards doing good towards others?
You're asking me how
Whether
my
you could share with maybe
yeah.
one or two experiences from your personal life, as much as you can comment.
Okay. Well, I have done some of that in the writing here. I think what I would share is that when I first began discovering Ignatian spirituality, I was quite embattled. I used to feel that God was asking me to do something, be a nun. I'm awful. And I didn't want to do this. How awful, and how could this possibly be a life that could be fulfilling and loving and all the rest of it? And it was through discovering what's God like and how is God? What is really the touch of God? And what is not God? And that this worrying and trying to force yourself to do something is not what God is like. And the experience of this real spiritual consolation is that experience of God being present to me, saying, do you know, actually it doesn't matter what you do, I'll love you. Now that is so liberating to realise that it doesn't actually matter where you live out your life, that if you're in right relationship to God, then God can work through you. So I actually felt very liberated by that. And so it paradoxically took me to the place that I thought that I couldn't live, which was about service, if you like. That's just the beginnings of something.
Thank you all for your questions, and thank you for answering those, especially giving us a taste of your own personal life. I think this has been a wonderful talk, very inspiring, even for somebody like me that's quite used to Ignatian spirituality. I hope you will all go away and think about what Kate has said, and again, if you feel you want more, let us know, please, let us know, and we will see what we can do. So thank you very much for your time.